Welcome to Requity Insights, a channel dedicated to documenting our journey to 100 world-class communities.
Welcome back to Requity Insights. I'm your host, Luis Velez, and I'm joined by my co-host and the CEO of the Requity Group, Dylan Marma. In today's episode, we're going to dive into the world of value-add investing in the RV campground space. The value-add investment strategy refers to a specific approach to acquiring and improving properties with the aim of increasing their value and generating higher returns. This strategy normally involves identifying properties that have untapped potential or are underperforming in some way and implementing targeted improvements to enhance their income-generating capabilities. RV campgrounds are a niche market with tremendous potential. Value-add investing in this asset class is all about going the extra mile. It's about turning a campground into a sought-after destination that leaves guests wanting to return year after year. Dylan, what does value-add investing in the RV campground space look like?
Well, value-add investing, it can be broken down into a few different parts. We like to boil it down into really 7 different pieces. Number 1 is property acquisition. So when it comes to the acquisition, you need to search for campgrounds that have the potential to add value. They have some kind of untapped potential or underperforming in some way. So most often, this can come from identifying ownership groups that are hands-off with the way that they run the property, or oftentimes they've owned it for long enough where maybe they were once passionate, but now they've lost that passion for really pouring into the campground. Some telltale signs of this include campgrounds that have outdated facilities. The bathhouse hasn't been updated in 20 plus years. They have limited amenities, limited upkeep of their amenities and their landscaping, poor marketing, limited web presence. Could be poor, low occupancy rates in a market that's usually pretty strong, or it could be below market rates, or my favorite is easy to identify is they just never pick up the phone. So ideally, you find one with all of the above, and acquiring a property with the proper amount of physical and operational deficiencies is crucial to be able to perform a true value-add business plan. The second piece of a value add comes into property enhancement. So after acquiring the property, you should really focus on improving to attract more visitors and drive revenue. Some of the early impact projects that we focus on include paving roads, updating property landscaping, including new signage, building a dog park, updating the bathhouse, adding picnic tables, fire pits, and updating site types and things along those lines. Some big areas you can focus on when it comes to your physical property enhancement is the infrastructure. A lot of the times, if you're buying an older campground, it may have partial hookup sites. So being able to take partial hookup sites that might just be water and electric and upgrading them to have water, sewer, and electric. You also may have 30 amp utilities on sites, and a lot of newer campers demand 50 amp utilities if they want to be able to run their AC and do everything that their camper is able to do. So you may have to upgrade the utility infrastructure very often to be able to accommodate to modern campers. You have campsite layouts. Oftentimes we find older campgrounds are just not even level sites. So you have to spend a lot of money and time to be able to level the sites out and be able to even extend sites sometimes to be able to accommodate to the newer, more modern campers. In addition to that, you have the design of the campground as well, and being thoughtful as to the different types of sites you want to offer your guests, whether it be you wanting to create buddy sites that are accommodating to group stays, or whether you want more pull-throughs to accommodate to a more transient guest, things along those lines. And lastly, you have expansion capabilities. So having the expansion capability within your campground is a great way to be able to create some serious upside for yourself and your investor partners. So the availability of excess land for expansion can open up a realm of possibilities to be able to drive revenue, because you already have the amenities, you already have the staff, you already have all of the infrastructure needed to be able to operate these sites. So usually it's a much lower cost per site to be able to add an expansion site than it would be to be able to build a site from complete scratch. So it allows you to really leverage the existing infrastructure and economies of scale. The big variable here is whether or not the local government will permit you to be able to expand, because oftentimes there are density limitations and some campgrounds may be grandfathered in at a certain number of sites. So you really have to, in your due diligence, work with the local municipalities to determine if expansion is a real option for you. In addition to that, we've hit on the infrastructure and the physical improvements. Now you have to think about the operational improvements. So the operational improvements can cover a wide array of things, but this is a piece that you should definitely not neglect, because this is really, I think, one of the most important pieces. Operational improvements includes making sure that everything from having a really great staff in place. We always say, for us as people looking to purchase existing campgrounds, we like to keep the current staff, assuming that they're great and they're meeting our standards and they're a good culture fit. That's always our preference. But if you don't have a good staff in place, then you have to make those changes quickly to be able to ensure the best guest experience. But you have to have people that are there and they're passionate, enthusiastic about serving the guests, and also going to be able to hold events and keep things organized and have a well-run campground, because especially your manager, getting that right is the most important piece of the equation when it comes to your operational improvements, because the rest will kind of trickle down if you get that right. But past that, think about your reservation booking experience. Having an online reservation platform can be crucial just to kind of streamline your operational experience. You may have a new branding process that you're going to put in place. You may set up a new event schedule, check-in processes, customer service processes, and various items that you can do to be able to ensure that you have a smooth operating experience and to create those what we call the wow experiences for your guests. On to the next one, you have your marketing and branding. So effective marketing is crucial for attracting more guests. Investors are able to develop a strong brand identity for the campground and improve their online presence through the creation of a user-friendly website and the right social media engagement. So that goes hand in hand with implementing targeted advertising and promotion strategies. We recommend a great website. Make sure it's mobile-friendly. Mobile will generally have significantly more hits than the non-mobile. Make sure you have someone there to pick up the phone and answer the phone when you're getting calls coming in, because still about 50% of reservations will take place offline via inbound calls versus 50% will still take place online. Make sure you have Google and Facebook ads. Doesn't need to be a crazy big budget, but a small amount of Google and Facebook ads can go a long way to being able to optimize your revenue, especially if you're either leasing up a long-term campground or you're boosting the reservations on a short-term campground. SEO optimization is more of a long game versus your ad spend, but it can be really powerful if you do it right and you're able to boost your organic Google search ranking. And then just think about how you want to brand the actual campground itself, whether you want to brand it as part of a bigger strategy, whether you want to keep the existing brand in place. If the existing brand is strong, we recommend keeping the existing brand in place, but if it's a big turnaround play, a heavy value add we'd call it, then you might want to come up with a new brand. Number 5, rate adjustments and revenue optimization. So beginning to bring your campground to market rates is crucial in the execution of your value add strategy. This needs to be done thoughtfully, as some legacy guests in your campground may have never experienced a rate increase, especially if you have a lot of seasonal guests, and it may be once every 10 years. So it's definitely important that you implement them as a part of the improvements and make sure that they're executed to solidify the position and they understand the changes that are going to take place, the improvements that are going to take place in the campground, and they're able to buy into that first and foremost. This is also where you want to tap into creating multiple streams of income to truly maximize the return on investment. This may be where you think about other additional services that you may be able to offer to the guests that are there at your campground. And it could come in the store of enhancing your campground store, offering food and beverage, could be golf cart rentals, could be additional arcade, an arcade game or additional services, just to name a few. Number 6, you have community engagement. Building a sense of community and fostering a positive camper experience can contribute to the success of value-add strategy for campgrounds. For us, this comes in the form of hosting social events and activities to foster a sense of community among our guests. This can include barbecue night, outdoor movie screenings, live music. These sort of things do a lot to be able to build a community and create a loyal customer. And lastly, exit strategy. So I'd say this is kind of to summarize. When it comes to a value add deal, you want to think about what's your long-term strategy and where do you want to be in a few years after you go and execute on the value add plan. So just understanding, are you going to go and build to sell, or buy and build to sell? And if your goal is to just build it up and then sell it, then maybe you want to keep it branded strategically, where it's got its own individual website, its own individual entity, and it's going to be an easy thing to be able to sell to another buyer down the road? Or are you planning to make it part of like a broader brand that you're building, where you want to have them all co-branded and rebrand under a package that makes sense? Maybe have a shared domain between several different campgrounds. These sort of things are things to think about as you think about your exit strategy. Do you want to refinance or do you want to sell, right? I think being able to clearly think about what your plan is will have a big impact on the way that you add value to the property. If your goal is just to kind of go in and fix and flip, then you may plan to do more in that first year or two just to try to drive the revenue as high as possible. Whereas if your goal is to be a long-term holder, as we generally tend to be, you may have a plan of more moderate upfront improvements, but also with the thought in mind that you're playing the long game and going to be doing gradual, continuous improvements throughout the life of the property. So maximizing the revenue in the first year or two is not as important as getting the buy-in from your guests so that you can build a long-term guest base that is going to help support the continued long-term NOI growth of the campground.
Dylan, how does the value add strategy for RV campgrounds benefit investors? Kind of building on what you just said.
So the value add strategy ultimately benefits investors by driving NOI first and foremost, right? The way that commercial real estate is valued is based on the NOI and the given market cap rate. So through increasing the revenue after being able to pour into the campgrounds, as we just discussed, you're going to ideally see better occupancy, better rates. You're going to see maybe multiple streams of income, which will drive your top line. In addition to that, you may be able to be more efficient with your expenses as well to be able to create a better net operating income. We tend to find that focusing on the top line in campgrounds is the number one way to move the needle. Enhancing the property value, the improvements made through executing on the value add strategy can definitely create more revenue, and that will equal more value. And then the last piece is really long-term stability. The industry is changing, and you want to position yourself to be able to serve the new RV camper and have an understanding of what they want and build that base and kind of be ahead of the curve in that, because our belief is that a lot of these campgrounds that don't put the right money into their capital improvements and keep up with the demand of the current customer, they will become obsolete over time. So by you being ahead of the curve, you're going to build those long-term repeat guests, which is where you want to be.
Now that we kind of touched on how the strategy unfolds, what would you say are some of the potential challenges or setbacks of executing a value-add strategy for RV campgrounds?
Yeah, so the main challenges that come to mind for me are, if you have expansion, you're going to have to deal with getting the necessary expansion permit and approval. Also, if you're doing any kind of building on the property, getting the permits and approvals from local municipality can always be a big hurdle and something you should be really aggressively understanding early in the due diligence process. In addition to that, you have managing the construction and renovation costs. The big area people can go wrong is by underfunding their projects, and I think it's really important that you also just keep in the back of your head that there will be ideas that you're not even thinking about right now that after you close, you are going to want to execute on, right? So building in a healthy contingency plan, because as you get to some more time on the campground, get to know your guests better, there are going to be new ideas that come up that you say, well, this would be a great use of our improvement budget, and you want to make sure you have that extra money in place to be able to do those kind of things. Maintaining profitability during the improvement while executing on improvements, right? I've seen some campgrounds that do such heavy construction projects that the customers leave lots of bad reviews because they're feeling like they're paying an increased price and then going into a construction zone, and it just doesn't feel fair to them. So being thoughtful about the guest experience and also trying to maintain profitability at the same time during that first year or two. If you have a heavy lift project going on, maybe trying to utilize your down seasons. Most areas of the country have a down season in the year where you can go and do a lot of your heavier lift construction projects. And then last thing is, I think just timing, right? Just realize that even though you can make these improvements, that it takes time for a brand perception to change in the customer's eyes. So realizing that for the customers to see you differently than they did prior to the way they saw the old ownership, it could take a year, it could take 2-3 years even to really be able to get that buy-in and that change in perception. So don't expect your occupancy and your rates to be able to be absorbed overnight. Just realize that it does certainly take, we feel like 12-month runway. If you're not seeing results at the end of 12 months, you should start being concerned, but don't expect it to be an overnight impact. It does take time.
So how do you determine the feasibility and the ROI of a value-add project?
So I think you should. So this is really where it's more of an art than a science, right? A lot of the times investors will ask me, hey, if we upgrade the campground store, how do you quantify the ROI on the work that was done to the store or the bathhouse? And I can always make up an equation for them if they want to have an equation that helps them support, having a clear quantifiable number. Yeah. But in reality, I don't do that because I try to help them better understand the bigger picture of, hey, for us to be able to get to the level of campground, or to change that perception again in the customer's mind to where they're willing to then pay more, or they're willing to come back more often to increase the occupancy, because those are going to be the two ways you're going to be able to drive value, right? Either increase occupancy or increase rates. Ideally, if you can do both, you're in the best position possible. But it's more about saying, hey, we're trying to get rates up 5%, occupancy up 10%, and the way we're going to do that is through taking more of like a holistic approach and trying to upgrade this from what might feel like call it a C-class type of a property to more of a B-class type of a property, right? And we're trying to create the experience that will accommodate to maybe a higher income demographic base, right, or something along those lines. So it's definitely more of an art than a science, and you want to be really thoughtful and strategic and start to test and measure. But it's easier to measure the direct impact on like site upgrades. If I take a partial hookup to a full hookup, I can usually give you a pretty accurate sense on that because I'll have historical data that I can leverage to say, hey, if we upgrade the partial hookups and they start operating like our full hookups are, this is the ROI we get on that. I can tell you the ROI on adding an additional site pretty easily. And oftentimes you can talk about the ROI on adding these other income streams and having like a general prediction on how much of our audience will be able to use that. But there are a lot of non-direct or indirect capital improvement projects that I think are necessary to be able to optimize the brand perception and give the experience that we're hoping to give. That does take time, but yeah, that's just something to kind of keep in mind, and definitely don't want to be overspending, but you also want to realize that it's okay to spend in certain areas if you're really trying to kind of give the entire project a lift, right?
Yeah, I think to your point, things like maybe the campground store, there could be some historicals if it was already established. Maybe if it hadn't been established, you could look at historicals for other campground stores.
Yep.
But then maybe something like a dog park is not something you can
Right.
quantify, but going to the guest experience side of things.
But you might know that, just random number, but 50% of the campers in that area have dogs, and that might make them 10%, 20, 25% more likely to stay with you. And you can try to kind of back into numbers and put a number on anything, but it's really just, you're definitely just trying to be more thoughtful about it, and just, you're not going to put in maybe a $200,000 campground doesn't give you any marginal improvement over probably very minimal marginal improvement over a $20,000. For example, if you spent $200,000 on your dog park, you probably have very little marginal utility over having $20,000 dog park, right? Yeah. So just being thoughtful on your budget, not going crazy with it, but realizing that by hitting on some of these various items, by having enough things for the kids to do, enough amenities for the kids to do, by having enough events throughout the year, by having a lot of the key things that people want to see, it will drive revenue indirectly.
Yeah, absolutely. How would you say, Dylan, investors could get started with a value-add investment strategy in the RV campground space?
Well, admittedly, getting into value-add RV is a difficult business, and I would recommend being very conservative to enter this business. I would recommend really trying to buy a campground that you are comfortable, ideally with the performance as is, just because the value add piece of it can be more risky and it can entail more, call it subjectiveness towards what you believe to be possible, due to the fact that there is often a lack of data and complete transparency over the occupancy and income rates of other campgrounds in the industry. So we find that to be able to get into value adds, our recommendation is not to go after the dirt cheap, heavy turnaround property that makes $0 and is in a tertiary market. I think those are the highest risk deals and are frankly not worth it. Our recommendation is usually to go after deals that are already cash flowing, but you see some of these areas of opportunity to be able to create additional value given their physical infrastructure, their online presence, and so on. So I lean more towards kind of the lighter to medium value add strategies. And I think just by starting, you can start with doing your homework, doing your research, getting familiar with the market, starting to talk to brokers, starting to build up a database of different maybe mom and pop ownership groups that are out there that you think might have interest in selling at some point, getting familiar with your numbers, starting to underwrite deals, doing a lot of evaluations, and then formulating your plan of action when the right opportunity presents itself.
Do you have any final thoughts on the value add strategy in the RV campground space?
No, I think I hit it. Just to summarize, though, I think it's a phenomenal space and one of the spaces that has the most levers to be able to add value. Yeah. But remember, this is an operator's business. If you're not ready to roll up your sleeves and operate, this is probably not the industry for you. I think it's a really powerful business, but it does take work to be able to execute on value-add projects, but done right, can be extremely profitable.
That's all we got for today. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Requity Insights. Remember that by acquiring underperforming campgrounds and implementing strategic enhancements, investors can truly unlock the full potential of these assets. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Requity Insights, hosted by our team at the Requity Group. You can find recordings of all shows along with our opt-in form to set up a call and view future investment offerings on our company website, therequitygroup.com, also listed in the show notes.